Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the MatchNet podcast. Today here we are with Robert. As you have seen, our setup has been upgraded. Really great. We're so happy for it. And we are very excited to talk with you guys about the conversations to have before the blessing. Some of you have seen the last couple of weeks, we have announced a big announcement a big news about the next blessings coming up. So there's gonna be a blessing in 2024 for young missionaries, for those who have participated in missionaries program in the past or those who will participate in a missionary program. And as well, we're gonna have a blessing in 2025 for the general public. So we thought it would be very relevant to talk about, okay, you go into the blessing, what are the things to make sure to discuss about before making the big decision, right? Yep. So how are you, Robert?
Yeah, doing good. Glad to be back. I heard you guys wanted me back, so I decided to come back. And of course, Carina always asks me, let's do a podcast.
Yeah, I had to do the whole setup before, like, okay, we're doing it.
Yep.
Before even we decide the topic.
Yeah. But I'm interested to get into this. I mean, I think it's really important. Maybe not enough people are given this advice, because it's hard to give advice on, like, first of all, yeah, how do you choose which person you want to be blessed with? And then as well, kind of like choose when you're ready to go. And I think all those decisions are like, it's almost like case by case a little bit. So which makes it difficult, I think, to give advice. However, I think through, just talking about it, you and I, there's a couple things that people should make sure to talk about and make sure there's some clarity about before you make the decision to get blessed. Because if you don't have these conversations, then you go into the blessing, you start trying to live together, but that issue comes up, and in some cases, it causes them to break their blessing. So better you have the conversation ahead of time and things are made clear.
Yeah. So something to make sure, like maybe we're going to start with our experience, our testimony, right? As we shared before, we got, you want to? Okay. Maybe we're going to start with our experience, our testimony. We didn't have everything figured out. We got matched in March 2018. And we were discussing about maybe the possibility of 2019 if a blessing will come up. But at the end, no blessing was in 2019. So the decision was easy for 2020, which, by the way, was the blessing that I have decided that I wanted to go for so many years. And yeah, when the time for the blessing started to get closer, we started to really make serious effort of like, okay, what we had to do, right? And it was because of your initiative, Robert, that we started the groups for testimonies from brothers and then testimony from sisters, and then we gathered all the brides and grooms.
Grooms.
Oh, grooms.
What's funny about that? I think there was this story once where two fathers said, if I matched you to a broom, you should say yes. So maybe in some cases it was bride and broom. Yeah.
So we started to do those testimonies, and that was very helpful to kind of share, okay, what are the things that will come up in the future, right? Like maybe immediately we're not seeing it, but what are those things that we had to think about, we had to discuss? Wow, yeah.
Right. Yeah. The idea was so that we could learn from older couples, right? Mm-hmm. And they'd come and then share their experience. And maybe not all of it was something that was 100% relevant or felt relevant, but there were some things that were useful to like kind of set your expectations. I would say I felt like at that stage, most people were pretty committed, but maybe it did help some people to kind of have some of these important conversations that they hadn't done so already. Certainly I remember there was at least one couple that had so many great points, but there was almost like too many, it was almost like, oh my gosh, we have to like clear up all these aspects of our lives, And I think it's totally fine to figure some things out along the way. But there's definitely some things that should be cleared up beforehand. And whether we were given advice on it or not, I think in our own experience, we kind of clarified two major ones, right? First one being like where we're going to live, and the second one being children. And I think for some people, the children one seems kind of obvious. It's like, oh yeah, we all want children. But I guess it's not the case, for everyone. So I think that's a big one that wasn't a hard discussion for us, but it's one of those recommended conversations, right? Like, do you want to have kids in the future? I'd like to have kids. How about you, right?
I do remember that you asked me that question, and I felt so, like, why? What in the world you asking me this? Like, I felt so, not upset, but like annoyed by the question. Like, of course I want kids. So therefore, for me, like going to the blessing, it means to create a family. But I understand that there are people that it looks very different, and then there's the timing as well, right? For some people, it's very clear when they want to start to have kids, and for others, not, right? And of course, for example, we did have a general concept. Yes, we will go to Canada, right? That was our decision. But at the same time, life happened, right? And for us, it was very interesting because right after the blessing, COVID hit, and things very quickly, our plans change as well with that. And I wonder, right, like our life, of course, it looks kind of similar to what we thought when we were going to the blessing, but at the same time, so many things changed, so many things were unexpected, right? And I think one of the main things is about willingness to change, right? Willingness to be flexible and willingness to give up on something, right? The truth is, when you receive the blessing, you stop being just an individual by itself and you start making decisions together. And yeah, that can be kind of scary, right?
It's a big shift. Yeah. Your whole life, you're making decisions for yourself. Well, your whole adult life, kind of, Before then, your parents are making a lot of your major decisions, and then you're kind of making decisions with your parents. But making a decision with a spouse is a very new experience. It's not quite the same as making a decision with like a sibling, like, oh, we're going to plan some trip together. They're talking lifetime, right? So
our first decision as a couple was for you to come to Uruguay. Can you share a little bit about what was your experience?
Well, yeah, you were talking about how things change sometimes, right, from our initial plan. And our initial idea was that I was going to visit Uruguay just for the summer because I was still in school. And so it only made sense that once September comes around, I'd go back here and then I'd study and then we'd be starting the immigration process. But because COVID hit, it was soon becoming the reality that the summertime wouldn't work for me to visit. And you actually called me this one morning and you're like, Robert, I don't think you're going to be able to come, if you keep your original ticket date, which was like in July perhaps, or maybe end of June, something like that. And yeah, this was in March already, right? Mm-hmm. And you were saying like, I think if you wait, all the flights and everything's going to be closed. Like, what if you came now? And I remember being like, oh my gosh, that's a crazy idea. Because, like you guys all remember, it was such a time where like no one wanted to fly anymore. And if you needed to fly, you wanted to do it soon before airlines were closing things down. And so it was really kind of this like needed to act now. And I remember being a little bit scared because it was kind of like a big decision, changing our ticket, making this move earlier to Uruguay. And but I think the thing that helped us is that we prayed about it together. And I think we both came to this conclusion that if we were both kind of in agreement, and almost more than agreement though, like committed to this, then God would be here in this decision, right? And so I think that helped comfort us a lot. Um, and in our dynamic, usually if we have a big decision to make, I'm usually more like, oh, like kind of like struggling with it in the moment. And then once the decision's made, I'm like, okay, that's what we're doing. And then sometimes it's Karina who's like, are you sure? Like, wait, should we do this? Wait, we should rethink this a little bit. Sometimes. um, I think I remember you calling me when I was at the airport. It's like, are you sure you want to do this or something?
Yeah, because your parents were freaking out, and I was like so worried that something's gonna happen to you as well. And then yeah, it was kind of stressful.
Oh wait, I forgot to end the story. That so we prayed and all that, and then 3 days I changed my ticket for 3 days later. And yeah, so then it was like almost instantly needing to start to pack and everything and tell my parents and
there was no day of return.
Oh, that's another thing. Yes. Well, no, I guess technically I had my return date still, like that ticket was still there from the for the summer, but there was kind of this understanding that like I don't know when the airports will open up again. So that, yeah, that's true. That was kind of another big part of this decision, and I'm sure that kind of made it stressful for my parents, to imagine this. But yeah, then it happened, and it was a great decision. I mean, I'm really glad that I got to spend like really a long quality time with your family, meet your community. I feel like new opportunities kind of presented themselves that maybe weren't going to be there if things had been different.
And the truth is, we were very blessed because that, for us, COVID was really good because it forced us to be together in a moment that we were not planning to be together. But the truth is, right after the blessing, we realized, oh man, we need to be together. It's like the matching process, being in a long distance during the matching process is hard, but being long distance after the blessing is like really hard. And I remember like a couple of weeks after the blessing, we were like, this is not gonna work if we're gonna be long distance, right? And here is like,
you should clarify. What do you mean it's not going to work?
No, yeah, it's not like we're gonna break the blessing, right. But maybe yes, because I know that there are so many couples that they get blessed, but they don't know still when they're gonna be able to live together, and the stress of doing the long distance relationship after the blessing is very high, and it really, like, long distance brings a lot of conflict, especially after the blessing, because after the blessing you stop being an individual, right? Like when you're in the matching process and you're in a matching process long distance, you're still being yourself, you're still doing your life. But the moment you get blessed, you're a couple, but you're a couple that is a split, and that is challenging. It's different. Like from every point of view, emotionally, spiritually, it is a challenge when you're not be able to live together. So I think like we were blessed that we were pushed to that, and we will learn to do it. But if I can say a recommendation for any new couple is your number one priority is to figure out how to live together, how to be together, right? And then when you figure that out, then you have to accommodate your life for that, right? So maybe one is still studying or both are still studying. Is there a way for one to transfer university? Is there a way for one to pause school and work during that time and then take turns? The truth is, once you get blessed, there are things that you're gonna need to give up. Like, it's not that easy to make a decision just like that. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna study for 5 years, right? Or I'm gonna do this, and we learn. I mean, yes, you came to Uruguay, but it came with a price, right? The price was school was very stressful. You started working, and like it was good. Your career, like you learned what you wanted in life for your career, but it just slowed down things for you. And maybe we could say, oh, yesterday was funny because yesterday before bed we were discussing about our 4 year of marriage, and what are the things that we would have changed if we could go back, right? And I mentioned to Robert, oh, maybe I will not have encouraged you to pause your studies, right? To continue studying. But now, like thinking about it, it wasn't just that you were discussing about your career and you paused your studies just because you paused your studies. It was because you prioritized our blessing, being together and creating a family life, first of all. And that was, I think that was so important, right? And we both had to prioritize the blessing on top of other things. Did they make our life more challenging and now we cannot buy a house so quick? Yes. But life, we find other ways, right? And we're still strong on the blessing. So I think when the moment you get blessed, your priority number one is the blessing. And therefore, your priority number one is to find a way to be together. I know that for some people it's very challenging with the immigration process. So that's something that there's no way around it. But really, like, immediately you have to find, and when it's an immigration process and one cannot go to the United States because they're still waiting for their visa or something like that, then it's the other person who needs to make the extra effort to go to visit, to go to their country and to spend time as you did, right? Like, you came to my country and spent time with us with a price, but it create a foundation in our marriage that otherwise could have never exist that way.
Or it'd be kind of like delayed, sort of. And then in that kind of delayed period of time, that's where it can be challenging. It can be rocky. I mean, we didn't even experience what that's like. We experienced, as you say, like a longer matching or long distance matching process, but we didn't really have to experience what it's like for us to live separate while we're blessed. I think since we've been blessed, we've only spent like a month apart, right?
Yeah.
A full month. Which is hard. Yeah, I guess I say that because, yeah, I don't know what it's like to be in that case. And definitely, yeah, I agree. Like, I feel for people who are in that situation. But I think your point is true that you should consider what is possible. Because sometimes we just have the concept that, like, it's not possible. I got this situation, you got that situation. And we kind of leave it at that. But it's just kind of like being willing to explore the possibilities. And if you explore the possibilities and you still both come to the conclusion, hey, it still just makes more sense for us to try to spend some time apart. But yeah, make sure to visit. You know, it's just like, that's just an example of a conversation, a little bit of a hard conversation, but like a conversation to be had where you kind of make a plan for yourselves. It's really...
I just want to say that in the Christian world, right, some of them, they still have the same concept of purity before the blessing, right? Before the marriage, of course. But at the same time, it takes them longer to get to that point because they bring their life together. Living together is not easy. So in the case of my grandma, for example, my grandparents were fiancés for like almost 10 years.
Really?
Yeah, because my grandfather was working, trying to get the money to buy the house. And when he was able to buy the house, then they could marry, right?
Was that like a decision they made together, or was it kind of like a social kind of standard or like a familial kind of standard?
Well, that was a culture, right?
That was
like
culture.
You go, like, there was not something like mortgage during that time, and renting, it wasn't something like very normal. It was, you get married, and your first night of marriage, you go to your house, right? To your new house. You're starting a new life together. That's a typical movie kind of scene where after the I do, the man brings the wife to the house, right? So I think there's this concept, right, of we're starting our life. Like, marriage meant starting our life together. Like, there's almost no person that I can think about outside our movement that they get married and they don't live together.
Yeah, because typically they're already living together.
Typically, they're already living together. Of course, they figured that out that part before.
But in other cases, yeah, they're also often in the same country or in the same place, so it's like, yeah, but I get what you mean. I think that's true. It's like it's part of the process. It's like, okay, hey, we're getting married. If we're not already living together, that's the time when we'd be living together.
Yeah, and then if there are things that are still not figured out and living together situation, and maybe that they need to wait a couple more years because both are studying or things like that, maybe there's no rush to go to the blessing. Maybe it's okay to have a long matching process because the step is still a little bit far.
So here we are back at the beginning, kind of like decisions to be made before the blessing. And you're saying that this is an example of one. It's like considering what it will look like after the blessing to live together and such. And you're proposing that if a couple realizes they won't be able to be together actually in a certain amount of time, 2 years, then they potentially should just wait.
Yeah. My only the only case that I think that it shouldn't be like that is those who needs to do the immigration process. Therefore, they need to get married and they need to get blessed to get married and therefore start the immigration process. I mean, do not rush that either, right? Because the moment you rush the whole process, then many mistakes can happen. And once you get legally married, there are like really big problems beyond only a blessing dissolution if something happens, right? Mm-hmm. So it really like getting legally married, it's a big step. Therefore, don't rush the big step in order to do the immigration process faster, right? But maybe there's you guys can figure out strategies of how to still live together or spend time together, even in long distance while you're doing the immigration process, right? But it's just like we did 3 years of matching process. It felt long, yes. Am I grateful for it? Totally. Because the first year was so like butterflies and like really great. And then the second year in our long distance relationship, that's where the biggest challenges came out. And that's where it was the hardest. And we going through those challenges during the matching process gave us the confidence. Okay, we're both going to prioritize our blessing no matter what. So we can make this decision like with confidence, right? So it really like a little bit longer matching process. And as well, there was one advice I remember I heard from Benji when I asked him like about the matching process, and he was saying like the moment a matching process is not going forward, is stuck. It's going backwards in a way, right? So a long matching process, that doesn't mean that you have to like you can have a long matching process just basically not communicating and not going forward in your relationship. Yeah, being indecisive. So that's not my recommendation. Like that kind of matching process can very be negative for both sides, right? Because maybe it ended up not happening and it's just a waste of time. But what I'm saying is like a long matching process with clear steps moving forward can very, very helpful for your confidence on how you're stepping up on the blessing. Of course, I understand that this is not the case of everyone. I mean, our parents went to the blessing without knowing each other. And then after the blessing, they met, right? So, I mean, I almost say millions, but maybe a couple millions couples in our movement did this process in that way. So, I mean, it works too. But I think there's a benefit of going to the blessing with confidence and going to the blessing knowing that you both gonna do your best for it, right? But at the end of the day, my main point, I believe, is your priority number one after the blessing is to live together. And then your priority number one after that is to create a happy marriage. And after that, everything else, right? School, career, and the other steps, like where to, like living in our own place, etc., right?
Yeah, it's amazing how things fall into place when there's a harmony between a husband and wife. I feel, suddenly decisions are easier. You're just able to be on the same page about things. And then there's power to that. There's I think it's the same if you have a vision or goal in your own life. If you have unclarity there, then you're likely not going to get to the destination you want to get. Even if you tried to have a clear plan, if you're not really sure I want this, then it might be difficult. But it's kind of doubled the difficulty about it when you're married, because now there's two people trying to harmonize. But then there's the benefit. If you do harmonize, it's like double benefit in a sense, right? Hope I'm explaining myself well there. You reap the benefit of two people being focused on a similar goal, and suddenly you get there much quicker, or you get there. Trying to think of another kind of factor besides quickness when reaching a goal.
Deeper.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I totally agree. We made many decisions in our lives. The first one was for you to come to Uruguay. The second one was to travel, actually, in 2021. Like, we went to the Dominican Republic, and then we went to several places in the United States while we were doing the immigration process. And that was either an easy decision for you, right? Because Robert's not a very traveler.
I'm sometimes not so adventurous.
But we were, I mean, it was starting to affect us to be in like in a one room working and like living our life in only that room.
Yeah,
and then,
work, study, just living, leisure. Yeah.
Yeah, and with COVID and all that, so it was a little bit challenging that, and we felt like traveling. And then there was a decision of going to Canada, where to live, and there like more complicated decisions started to happen, right? Like, okay, now are we ready to have kids? You were struggling as well with the idea of having conversations about having kids, and the same afterwards, like moving here, buying a car, career-wise, right? Like when you decide to change your career, and none of those decisions are easy, and then sometimes are complicated. But then, like, I think something that it was good was we 100% wanted to support each other in whatever the decision was, and that comes with sacrifices, but we don't see it as a sacrifice because we're seeing it as a decision that we're making together, right? And at the same time, it's like, yeah, we are choosing. And I remember at some point I was getting very stressed because I felt like things were happening because my own decision, and I don't remember when exactly. Like, oh, why do we decide this? Why I decide this? Why? And then you came to me and comforted me. Hey, we made the decision together. We were doing it together. Therefore, like, we are winning this together, right? And Robert, by the way, is an amazing husband. He like supports me in everything, and I will not even say 50-50. Like, it's even more. It's just we're a team, right? And things happen in our house and in our family because we're both giving our 100%.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I'm really glad we can operate as a team. That was something really important to me, that my marriage looks like a team where it's not just one person making the decisions and making the calls, you know. I wanted it to really feel like both people are shaping and making decisions together, you know. Um,
I do remember the decision we just made that I was feeling guilty. Isabella going to daycare. So Isabella has started daycare 2 weeks ago, and that was a decision I was like feeling very heavy on me. And you were coming to me like, "Hey, we're doing this together. We're making this decision together. So like, we're in this together, right?" So yeah. And as our motto in life, like if we make a decision together with God, God is with us, right? So that was our decision, and we really feel like Isabella is being protected during this time. Where are we doing this podcast, for example?
yeah, it's still pretty new for us, but yeah, it's been going okay. Well, I think you've given lots of examples of decisions that followed the blessing. Uh, I think we wanted to touch on decisions before the blessing, right? So I don't know how.
Conversations.
Conversations, right?
Yeah.
So do you think are those some examples of conversations that maybe could be started in the matching, or is it just kind of like if you learn how to start making conversations, having conversations about important topics in the matching, it just will kind of be a skill that you can continue to build on, and it will benefit your blessing?
Well, I will throw the question back to you in a different way, because I mean, I think conversations are important, but then they are as important as how worth you give to your words, right? How much integrity you have. So we were just discussing before recording. What are the case of those who are struggling with sexual integrity? And they say, I will change, right? And then you go to the blessing with 100% commitment that thinking that this person will change, and they're struggling to change, right? So I think these conversations are as important as how how much integrity the person has, right? So what do you will say in this case?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because yeah, that was something that came up to us, is like, you know, sometimes in the matching process, and just, you know, being kind of younger, you don't exactly know maybe how to answer that question, you know, or like, and it doesn't even have to be that specific one. I will get to it, but I guess I'm trying to give a little bit more context. For example, there's a question of like, oh, like where we will live. Some people, they're just like, oh, I don't know, you know, or sometimes people will just, without really kind of considering it, be like, oh yeah, it's fine. Like I'll move where you are. But then when the reality comes, right, when they're in the blessing, then all of a sudden they're like, wait a sec. Oh, actually, I don't want to do that. And then suddenly it's like the other person was kind of trusting your words, right? And that's where, you know, as you're saying, this integrity is so important. You know, we don't want any of you guys to be making this decision of the blessing based on sort of like wishful kind of promises or thinking, you know, because certainly people can say whatever, right, in the moment, sometimes just to sound good, just to and maybe sometimes people really mean well, but I think integrity is all about making your actions, your words into action. There's a certain kind of reliability and trust that you have, you know. If you trust someone and you can rely on them, they very likely have integrity, right? Where everything's in alignment. They'll fulfill the words that they say. So in your example, right, like I think that is a common situation that people get into, right? Where they either the partner tells the other one that, oh yeah, I have this issue and I'm going to work on it, or I am working on it. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's actually kind of discovered, right? It's not something necessarily, you know, that's told. Better if it is, right? Better than the other person discovering it without you having told them, or it's kind of like forced to the surface in some sense. It's like, what aren't you telling me? You know, I feel like there's something going on, you know, and you're not telling me. Yeah, that's not a nice place to kind of have that conversation. I've said a lot, but can you just remind me of the question again, just so I can
So, like, in cases, we're saying that the conversations are as powerful as the integrity that the person, and then like how to make sure. Like, I believe that of course the conversations are important in relationship to integrity. So, what are some things that couples can do to strengthen their integrity more than just the words itself?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of a concept that kind of came up in the matching process that we realized can kind of be there for people. It's this idea of like testing, right? Or checking, right? You're kind of like seeing if they're going to change, if they have the ability to change. And you're kind of like waiting to see that, you know? So I'm not exactly sure how to address that part. I guess I think, yeah. So for the person who, perhaps needs to work on something, they have to be very serious about what they're saying, that like, hey, if I'm going to work on this, then if I say I'm going to work on this, then I will, I'll make this a priority. That's one thing that a lot of people don't quite realize is actually it needs to become a priority, especially around issues related with sexual integrity, any kind of addictions. It's got to become your priority to work on it. It can't actually just be like the thing I do with my extra time. That's not going to work. So there has to be kind of like the integrity is like, if I'm going to make that promise, it's like I understand as well what that promise will entail, and I'm committing to that as well. So I'm not just committing to the first step of like, oh yeah, I'll join a recovery program. No, it's like, hey, I'm committing to the whole journey. When I tell you, my potential future spouse, that I'm going to work on this, it means I'm committing to the full recovery healing process. And that's a hard thing to like honestly really do. It's hard, but it's 100% necessary, and it's way more powerful when you speak in that way, when it really has the gravitas, like almost to the point where, it's like taking on a project that you're not even exactly sure you can do, but it's like with the seriousness that I'm going to find the way to do it, So I guess I don't need to speak for other cases, but in this particular case, when it comes to this, again, kind of issues around sexual integrity, that's kind of the way you have to really approach it, And I think that's also what the receiving partner should be able to trust in those words in that way, They also, of course, kind of need to give the grace and space and patience to go through that process, because sometimes the process is not just, it's often kind of like has its ups and downs, but gradually you want to be seeing them head upwards. So I think, if I was going to give a suggestion to somebody who's, I guess, supporting a match who's in this recovery journey, I would just say, really be patient with them, be allowed, make sure, like, one thing that they should have is someone that they're talking with. Probably it shouldn't be you, but it should be someone like an elder brother or someone in like a recovery program like High Noon's Ascend, where we have mentors or a facilitator, that sort of thing. But you yourself don't need to be in the nitty-gritty of the recovery process. But I think one thing that maybe could be seen as kind of like a metric that there's kind of growth is like, are they able to be more vulnerable with you? Not necessarily confessing when they do a particular mistake or have a particular slip. No, they don't need to share those details, but they're becoming a little bit more vulnerable with their emotions. Because that's really key in this journey too, right? It's like understanding that there's an emotional kind of, like there's emotions that we're kind of either ignoring, pushing back, hiding from other people. And it's just, are you feeling that you're getting to know them better? Are you feeling like there's no longer as many shadows in their life? They're more vulnerable and forthcoming.
Sounds like for me that something that you're bringing up, which is really important, is of something that it can happen. It has to happen in the matching process. Is yes, once you get blessed, you want your blessing to be your priority number one, but during the matching process, you want to see that in their lives already, like as a result. Like, and that doesn't mean the matching process is the priority number one. Their blessing is the priority number one, and therefore, everything around it is you see that is priority, right? So in case of integrity, right, if they say, oh, I'm working toward this, you see that action and you see the results, and that's their priority. So for example, in the matching process, I'm working on my sexual integrity during my matching process. If they do it as their number one priority, that means that they're going to put the blessing as the number one priority, right? And we were discussing about
I
this
would
concept.
say it's even vice versa, actually. If you're going to make the blessing your number one priority, then this becomes your priority.
Exactly. And then the everything around what it makes me a better spouse is a priority, right?
And another way to put that is like what makes you your best self in general, actually. So I think that's just one thing that I think is important to distinguish is some people, they hear, oh, I got to make my blessing my priority, which almost feels like I have to make my spouse my priority. Like just make sure like everything she wants can happen, blah, blah, blah. How can I make her happy? But actually the prioritizing the blessing, especially in the matching, is about prioritizing you and your growth, actually.
Totally.
Yeah. Not prioritizing you to be comfortable, but prioritizing you to become your best self.
Totally. Yeah. And this is something that we were discussing the other day as well, that it will be good to share, that we tend as a humans to prepare when things are there happening, right? So for example, I was telling Robert, I should study Korean since I might be going to Korea, right? And then it's like, why we do things just last minute, right?
Well, it's like in that case, it's like you knew at some point you're going to be going to Korea for a blessing, right? You maybe didn't expect it to be this soon, but you knew it was going to come. But it was only until it's kind of immediately in front of you that you're like, oh shoot, I should learn Korean. But the reality is like it was going to happen. And so, yeah, we made that comparison to the matching, right? It's just like, it's going to happen, but sometimes we are hesitant, or we kind of avoid doing the preparatory steps because it's not immediate. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, continue with what you're saying.
Totally. Do you want me to throw it to you? These things that you haven't prepared. Just kidding. But yeah, that happens as well during the matching process and in preparation for the blessing. It's going to happen. Like your matching is going to happen. Therefore, work on your sexual integrity. Work on what it makes your best self, right? When you're single, once you get matched as well, keep working on your best self when you are during the matching process. And then once you get blessed, like problems will come up. So my second number one advice for new couples, and this I know that you were trying to talk about for people in the matching, but that's for new couples. The first number thing is do your first year of marriage right. Try as much as possible to get like all the advices and get the habits of your marriage right, because the habits that you create in your first year of marriage becomes a foundation and your new normal. When you enter to a new job and there's a culture in your job, and from day one they teach you, oh, this is how we do things here, and it's kind of strict. You have to wear formal clothes, and you have to be polite, let's say. Then you will find it in maybe 1 or 2 months. That's your new norm. That's what you had to do. That is what it feels normal. I mean, if someone comes with a different culture to your work, you're gonna feel it wrong, and that person it's not gonna feel right or correct. So when you get blessed, you get the opportunity to start your life kind of like again, and as you enter into a new job, let's say. What happens is many people tend to be like more relaxed in the first year because they allow each other to be a little bit more like themselves in a way, which is fine to be themselves, but maybe not creating the culture that they want in their marriage, and not discussing about what kind of culture we want in our marriage, what kind of culture is going to have our family, what are our boundaries, where are the things that we want to happen, what kind of habits we want to create. And if you really work hard for your first year of marriage to create that culture, to create those habits, then it's going to feel very natural. Let's say the opposite. You go to a job and it's very informal, very loose, right? And you just go there. People like say bad words. They don't care. It's like that's kind of like the culture. And then a new manager comes and they say, from now on, these are the new rules. How hard it's gonna be to need to change the behavior instead of having done it right from the first time. It's 5 times harder to change a behavior than start it well. So the same in a marriage, like, oh, now after 3 years of marriage, I think we should do things like this, or I think you should not talk to me like that, or we should create this culture, but you already have created a different culture, then it's going to be really hard to do it. Is it possible? It's totally possible. It requires both sides to work on it. But if you start right, then even if you later you become a little bit more loose, you knew you remember what it was like, and it's easier for both to go back to it.
Well, I would just adjust that a little bit at the end, that you wouldn't be going back to being more loose. It's more like, it's kind of like practicing, right? If you're practicing a certain skill, in the beginning it feels very regiment and kind of like very like you have to just do your scales or practice that one move again and again. But then once you get it, you can then begin to freestyle. So that's how I interpret your word of being more loose, because you're not going to revert back to kind of unstructured. You're actually going to find the freedom in the structure that you've sort of created in this sort of culture to fully be, maybe more expressive or all those sort of things. I just want to mention that because you use loose in both cases. So it's a different kind of like loose, right? Yeah. No, that's a really, really powerful point. Yeah. And don't feel like scared by that like, you have to like, it doesn't have to be so heavy and hard as maybe it might sound in your mind, that like, oh, we have to really set things really strong and clear. Carina is talking in a year period. So in that period, you kind of have to figure it out, So it's often what that will look like is like, oh, we'll have some kind of like conflict, and then we'll assess that conflict and be like, okay, actually, that's not how we want to do conflict, right? So it's just like catching that earlier, right? And maybe it sometimes takes, 2-3 conflicts, and then you're like, okay, hey, we gotta change something. But the point is, if you continue to allow that sort of like kind of unhealthy kind of behavior, again, just using conflict as an example, if you really use like put downs and like swears and that sort of thing with each other, that really has a negative effect on each other. It's really hurtful. And then, but if you don't kind of catch that and nip it in the bud, that's exactly something that will just kind of continue and then to change it later on, because someone's like, I've had enough, like we can't do this. It's going to be hard to change that. I agree. But so it's just, I guess I just wanted to make the point that it's not something from the get-go. It's like, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it this way. No, it's more like, it's kind of like a discovery between you two where you're both are prioritizing, finding kind of your most ideal way of doing things. So it's often a lot of assessment. To be honest, I was reminded about sex, It's actually a lot kind of like that, where you are hoping, you really don't want to create any like unhealthy or kind of unhelpful habits when it comes around sex, right? You want to ideally figure out how to really communicate well, discover, what your partner likes and how to do that. And once you get better at that, yeah, for sure, in the future, you can freestyle, You won't have to kind of think through it. You've kind of gone past the practicing stage. So hopefully that was a helpful addition, that it's kind of like ultimately what we're talking about is like practicing good habits, and then eventually they'll become kind of like the culture. They'll be established already. It won't be something you have to, I'd say, like work as hard to make sure they're there, because you've established them. There's a foundation.
Yeah. So when we're making decisions together and we're making decisions for our family, right, and putting the blessing as a priority, there might be someone that feels like, oh, I had gave up so much for this, right? Or starts to have resentment, right? So last year, for example, we moved to Edmonton, and which was your city, and I felt several times why I'm here, right? Why I'm here in this city.
We could be anywhere else.
We could be anywhere else, and it. I even with 3 years of marriage at that time, right? 2 years and something. Our identity as a family wasn't still strong enough, right? And it was very interesting. I gave birth, and then we went to Uruguay because I felt like I really wanted to go to Uruguay. And my realization was, oh, wow, I want to go back home. Where is home? Where my house with my husband and my daughter is, right? And it kind of shifted this space of where is my refugee? Where is my home? Where is my
refuge?
My refuge? Huh? Okay. Where is my refuge? Where is my home? Is there where my family is? Who is my family? It stops being mom and dad. It becomes the family that you're creating. Of course, mom and dad are still important, and extended families is still important, but it takes.
Always be your OG home in a way, right?
Yeah, but it takes time to create your identity as a family, right? And those are the things, and of course, and those are the conversations that you can have when you're long distance, even after the blessing. What kind of culture we want to create? What are the rules, or what are the boundaries? What are the rules? Can be happy rules too, right? What are the traditions that we want to have? What are our priorities? What is going to be our lifestyle? How our day could look like as a couple? What we will be doing, you know? I just feel like you need to create that identity, and it takes some time. And it's fine that it takes time, but slowly, that's what it means for your blessing to become your number one priority, is for your identity as a family to be created as a couple, right? And it's super important to really explore it, and at the same time find yourself in that too, because you still need to be you, right? So even if I moved to Edmonton, I was like, okay, I'm gonna start going to yoga classes, I'm gonna start doing painting classes, I'm gonna start working and creating my own kind of person in this new family, in this new culture, this new house, right? So you don't lose yourself because you're married, but you're just making decisions together as a family right now, and your personal decisions impacts your family.
Can we circle back to that point you mentioned about how this is an example of conversations you can have when you're in the matching, especially in long distance? Or actually, I think you mentioned post blessing, but you happen to be long distance,
or in person.
Yeah, or in person, right? What do you think maybe makes it challenging to have that kind of conversation? Do you think it's something that most couples, they have that conversation? Like it's easy to have that conversation?
Well, I think the challenge is the same as when we were discussing why people prepare when things are just there, right? It's because we we don't think that we need to study for the exam until the exam date is set 1 week before, right?
It's a habit of procrastination.
Maybe, or we don't think this is relevant right now. But I do believe that it helps having this discussion. It helps the moment when you live together to have clarity, but at the same time to know, okay, this is the direction we're going.
I'd add that I think there needs to be an element of fun into the kind of vision creation process, the vision for your family tradition and culture and all that. And it really can be. But I think sometimes maybe if we see it as like homework, like I have to do it, like it's kind of like, it's like some challenge, and like maybe you'll start to get upset because you guys aren't seeing it the same way, or like, oh, she's not understanding me. Like I think it's pretty important to keep a pretty like I was just reflecting on like how to balance between keeping it light but also being sincere about it, right? Like, so it's still like what you're saying does matter, but it's also understanding that hey, like we're not going to figure it out immediately right now, but let's talk about it.
So as a summary of this episode conversation that we have a plan, and then it became very like a lot of conversation, a lot of points. But I think priority number one is your blessing during the matching, but after the matching, and working and showing that your priority number one is a blessing. That's the most important thing, right? And knowing like 100% that you both parties will do your 100% for it and for this family that you're creating. It's the best thing that you can have. And therefore, like trying now, and once you're figuring out the blessing, how to live together has to be a really high priority, and trying to figure that out and doing the effort for both sides to living together and starting their life together, and with that creating the habits for a happy marriage in your first year of marriage. During the matching process, having the discussion of big conversations, of course, but at the same time working on your integrity, that your words will have power, that your words matter, right? And how you work in your integrity, becoming like practicing integrity in your own life as an individual. So if you say that you want to do something, do your best to make it real and create a certain foundation where you can even trust yourself. Oh, I have said several times that I will do this, and look, from the 5 times I say it, 4 or 3 times I was able to do it. I do have a foundation of integrity that I can use, right?
A big part of it too is knowing when to say, I'm not going to do something.
Yeah.
I think as well. Because sometimes we get out of integrity because we overpromise or we overcommit to something, because it's a lot about just becoming emotionally aware too, because sometimes people in a moment feel very like emotionally inspired and like upbeat, and someone's like, hey, can you help me with this? And you're like, absolutely, I'll be there. 4 a.m. you want me to come to your house and help you build something? I'll be there. That day comes around, your alarm clock rings at 4 a.m. and you're like, I don't want to wake up. What was that about? That's an example of actually being out of integrity. And you can try to make all the excuses or justifications that you want, but the truth is, you overpromised. Your word didn't matter actually, and that's not something you want to have. So, just thought I would add that kind of point. It's like it's about committing to the things you are going to do, but then also knowing when to sometimes say no to something, knowing when to like, hey, I'm not going to do that actually.
Totally. So integrity is connected with self-awareness. So working on knowing yourself is highly important. So your words actually align with your vision and what you feel and what you can actually commit to. So the same of the blessing, going to the blessing and committing for the blessing to be for this relationship to be your number one priority, it all will require self-awareness, right? And then, yeah, I think those were the main points that were shared in this podcast. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Just that I hope you all have a great time having these conversations. I really am a believer that most of these conversations, they don't need to be hard things. They're not things we should be afraid of. Sometimes our fear of the subject matter of the conversation is what holds us back from having the conversation. But it's actually, the conversation will help you so much. Because sometimes even, there's, heck, I can think of so many examples of things we talked about, and it was not just once. It was not like, okay, today we're going to figure this out. Let's have the conversation. And it rarely is you figure it out, but it just, again, allows you actually just to kind of know the other person more, start to get a little bit more on the same page. Yeah, just know that it's gonna take some time, to come to some of these decisions, to have some of these conversations. In most cases, it's not just kind of one big everything on the table kind of conversation. It's totally fine to be like, hey, we were talking about that one thing the other day, and I just realized I want to add something to that conversation. Or can we talk about it again a little bit more? I want to get into it, the topic of what it would look like for us to live together after the blessing. It's really feel that like you are creating something together. The person you're in a process with, you should feel that they already are starting to be like you're shaping your team. Like we kind of brought up that point in the beginning. You want to feel like a team. So it's difficult if you're sharing things and you always feel like, I don't know, maybe they're making you feel like a problem or like issue. Like, hey, we already figured that out. Like, leave it alone, That might not be a good sign that this, like, you may have to consider, hey, is this someone that I want to make this kind of commitment to be a team for eternity with, So a couple extra thoughts.
For our next episode, we're going to be talking about what are the key habits.
Why are we making a commitment to it? We barely knew what we were going to talk about today.
No, but it's my commitment. I'm a person of integrity.
It's your commitment.
Yeah.
But you're saying we.
Yes, together. We're going to discuss what are the key habits we believe to create in the marriage for a happy life.
And as my wife said, I will support her, as I always do. So, yep. That's what we're talking about next time. Be ready.
So, thank you, mi amor. Thank you for this podcast. Thank you, everyone who listened to us until this end. And yeah, I hope to see you next episode.
Yeah, send any questions as well.
Oh, yeah. And if there is any conversation that you guys would like us to have, please let us know.
Take care, guys.
Bye.